World is one. I'm Akanksha Swaroop, and WION continues to bring you an insight into the Union Budget of 2021. For that, let's quickly go across to our guest, who is the Chairman of Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare, Mr. Arvind Virmani. He's joining us live from New Delhi. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Virmani. Now, in your opinion, what were the key takeaways of this budget? Is it a need of the hour budget?
I'm sure you know the context of the budget, which is post-pandemic.
Right.
But if I start straight away, go into the budget, I think the one big reform is the spelling out in detail of the framework for strategic sale. You may recall that a couple of months ago, the cabinet had approved this, but the details had not been spelled out, and one has pointed this out on social media, etc., and one was waiting for it. So I think there's the spelling out, particularly not only of the public sector disinvestment, loss-making units, but the big bang really is in the public sector bank privatization of IDBI and two public sector banks. So that's really the big idea. And then there are a number of other related reforms which all have the objective of resuscitating growth or putting it back onto the high growth path which was there 2 or 3 years ago. These include infrastructure, banking, the finance in terms of the single securities code, FDI and insurance, and certain other welfare measures.
Right.
Are indirectly connected.
Right. Mr. Virmani, the finance minister just addressed a press conference right now, and not only was she questioned about this gigantic budget deficit, even experts are questioning it. She was asked if the government will be able to contain this budget deficit to 6.8%. Contrary to her claims, experts are saying that it is hard to contain such a huge budget deficit. What is your opinion?
If you look at the change, the budget was 9.5 last year, and it's sought to be brought down to 6.8%, though the actual increase in the budget in nominal terms is something like 3,000. So the real question with deficit is, there are two aspects to it. One is the current deficit, now, let's say that the
right.
year which the budget is for,
right.
and the trend over the next 5 to 10 years. What economists look for is a trend, and we know from history, I mean, these are not episodes like this of pandemic, of wars.
Right.
These major once-in-a-century events have occurred all over the world.
Right.
And we know from history that the best way to put it back on the proper trend is to increase the growth rate. So I think the key, I think people are barking the wrong horse if they are just concerned with whether it will be 6.8 or 6.84 or 6.5.
Right.
I think that's completely irrelevant. I think what the key is, what are the reforms which will promote growth, put it back on the fast track so
right.
the trend of the net GDP ratio goes down.
Mr. Virmani, it's interesting that you mentioned about these growth reforms. And since you mentioned the future trends, how much time do you think the economy would take to return on the path of fiscal consolidation?
I think there are a number of reforms have been done. As the PM has repeatedly said, there were a series of reforms and they will not end with the budget. He clearly implied that a few days ago in his speeches and interviews. And there are a few things left. I don't think everything is over, but basically there are two aspects which I think need further reforms, like a tax reform and some welfare reform. But if those things are done, I am very confident that for the next decade we can go back to above 7% growth.
Right.
A lot of people are saying we'll never get up to 7. They are talking about at most 6.5%. I don't agree with them. Provided, as I said, these pending reforms which are well identified, we have done research on some of those ourselves at EGROW Foundation, and if those are done, I'm confident that we can go over 7%.
Right. Let's now look at some broad areas where the spending has been, of course, dedicated. In healthcare spending, Nirmala Sitharaman announced a total spending of around 2 lakh crore rupees on healthcare alone, which will also, of course, include vaccine development and inoculation. Do you view this announcement as a positive one? And what's your take as far as the spending on healthcare has been announced?
I'm very encouraged at the fact, I have often, I actually, when I was in the Planning Commission last, I had reviewed the whole health system. And what I'm impressed by is it has focused, on things which need to be done rather than what people keep saying, raise the ratio of health expenditures to budget from X% to Y%. I think that's a completely wrong way to go. I think the government has done the right thing. Let me give you 2 examples which are very critical. One is that extension of Swachh Bharat to urban, Swachh Bharat urban from Swachh Bharat rural. That I think is very, very important. My research, 10-year-old research and supplementary has shown that there is something called environmental entropy, which makes stunting, which results in stunting. For example, in slums where the sewage runs in the roads, there are no proper sewage systems. That is a major cause of stunting. People don't know that. So my basic point, that is just an illustration. So that liquid waste management, fecal sludge management, we hate these words, but it's a very, very important element, and you'll see the results. Again, you will see in dramatic, we have a change in this whole wasting and stunting in the urban areas.
All right. Mr. Virmani, scrapping of income tax for senior citizens under certain conditions and the ease of tax compliance policies. How do you view the budget announcements on taxation this year?
So that's a continuing process, the digitization of the tax, the distancing. I would love to have a completely embedded, if I could get my whole income, I don't have to file my income tax. I could just pay if I get the thing. That's a process. It hasn't been completed. She's announced some more steps. So I think that's a good process. But one of the places where I differ and which I'm not disappointed, because I hope in the next 15 months there'll be more, is that tax simplification is an essential element of having a simple system.
Right.
You can do all these simplifications of administration, but they don't sustain unless you simplify the tax system itself. So I think 2 things which I still hope will be done in the next 15 months.
Reduction of tax slabs.
Code, the GST reform, and some customs simplification.
Right. Mr. Virmani, there's so much to talk about, but I'm running short of time. So I'm going to touch upon some broad areas, which were, of course, the key highlights of this year's budget. Keeping the recent farmers' unrest in mind, are you satisfied with the announcements made on agriculture, considering they occupied a significant part of the budget?
Well, I think it is, in this case, it's more a question of education. I mean, those of us who've worked on agriculture know how much money is spent on MSP.
Right.
She basically spelled those things out. I think people need to know. There seems to be a lot of ignorance, I'm sorry to use this word, and misinformation, even among economists. I mean, there are people I know who have been my friends for 20 years, but the way they are commenting shows that they don't know the data. I mean, I find that, I'm sorry, a little personal on this, because they are my friends. And so this information has to be put out in the public domain. Very important.
All right. Mr. Virmani, how do you view the announcements made under Atmanirbhar Bharat or Self-Reliant India? Are they enough to boost the Make in India initiative and even to boost manufacturing?
I think the PLI scheme has already been announced, so I don't, really there was more of a recitation in the budget. And again, I would see it in the context what PM said, that it's a continuing process. Again, things have been announced. It doesn't require a big bang. It does need complementary customs duty reform. There is some mention of it. She mentioned, the FM mentioned 84 exemptions there. She did say that some further simplification of customs would take place. So I presume that will happen over the next months.
Right.
And yes, we do need it for this Atmanirbhar.
Right.
The customs simplification is necessary complement to Atmanirbhar.
Right. Mr. Virmani, to liberalize foreign direct investment in Indian insurance companies up to by 74% has been viewed as a welcome change. But is it enough for FDI that is currently needed in India?
See, FDI has been liberalized over the last 10 years a lot. I actually was the member secretary of a major FDI reform committee, and much of the things we recommended, this was, I think, during the Vajpayee era, where Mr. N.K. Singh was the chairman, and much of that has been done. For example, one of the most difficult was defense FDI. So that has done. I think insurance actually was the last kind of pending big FDI change which was needed. So I'm glad it's done. I'm happy it's done, and it gives a good signal at this time when we are trying to attract supply chains, value chains from the world. So I think it's very timely.
And Mr. Virmani, before I let you go, I'm running short of time. Let's just quickly touch upon the topic of disinvestment. Will it be comfortable to secure buyers in a post-COVID world, especially for Air India, at a time when the aviation industry has been so severely impacted?
Well, Air India, you picked the most difficult one. I mean, I think the world is awash with funds, and they're looking for opportunities. So this privatization thrust is very timely again, because there's going to be a lot of money coming in. Air India, I'm not so sure, but to the extent that Air India as a foreign airline, the key thing here is working out safety protocols. So from what I hear about the US, most US airlines have worked out these safety protocols. And if we are able to put those in place, I think few Indian airlines are also able to do it. Then this industry could revive very quickly. And yes, there could be a market, but I'm not certain that there will be right at this time, for the reason you mentioned.
Right. But slowly, steadily, let's hope that India gets there. Thank you so much, Mr. Arvind Virmani, for joining our newscast today.